Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Akshay, and I thank you all for joining us today at USAS Foundation. We're going to revisit the 9/11 attacks in the US and its global fallout in the past 2 decades, especially with regard to terrorism. So today we have with us founder Mr. Abhinav Pandya, who is a seasoned expert on security and geopolitical issues. His specialization includes South Asia, terrorism, Islamist and right-wing extremism, Afghan conflict, Indo-China conflict. He was also an advisor to former Governor of Jammu Kashmir, Mr. Satyapal Malik, during the critical phase when India abrogated the special status of Kashmir. He is an author and regularly writes for several well-reputed global platforms like National Interest, 1945, Sunday Guardian, Express Tribune, and many others. He also actively engages in public commentary and discussions and provide crucial insights on his area of expertise. I welcome you, sir, and it's really a privilege to host you today.
Namaskar, Akshayji. Thank you very much for such a generous and a wonderful introduction. Okay. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you. Yes.
All right. So I will right away go to our first question. And for that, I
Sure.
would like to take you a little back into the history. So it's been over 2 decades now since the Black Swan event of 9/11 took place in America. So how would you put into perspective the situation America faced at that point, and how it resulted in the increased securitization of American foreign policy?
Thank you so much, Akshay. Very interesting question. Well, let me begin with the idea that the American foreign policy's basic premise has always been very security centric. Okay, even when you go back to the Cold War era, it was mostly about communism being a big specter, it's being an existential threat, and their entire foreign policy moves, decision making, they were just motivated by that particular idea. Second, it comes about the weapon sales and armament sales. So when you have, because that brings a major part of the economy boost and profit boost to your economy. So security has always been a very strong bedrock of the American foreign policy. But then with the this event of September 11 attacks, it acquired a very different turn. Because before that, Americans were living in some kind of a complacency that, whatever security threats are there, they cannot attack the American mainland because it's far away, an island situated, in some distant land where no threats can reach them. Technologically, superiority is the main bedrock of American strength. So, they were living in some kind of a comfort zone. But the September 11 actually displayed to Americans, it showed them that, they were also vulnerable. They were not immune to these threats, and in particular, when the entire event was staged by a very medieval styled, terrorist group, a non-state actor, not a state actor, then this particular thing shocked Americans even more. That kind of attack couldn't have been. It was never staged by even the state actors, which were considered American adversaries for a very long time. The attack was staged by a ragtag rebel group, Al-Qaeda. They were just like medieval barbaric rebels living in some caves of Afghanistan, and if they could plot an attack sitting there in America, then that was a very powerful message, and it certainly led to an over securitization of American foreign policy. But following that, whatever happened, I feel that in a way it was good that Americans launched a war on terror after that, because India was the victim of terrorism since 1990, but the Western world never paid any heed to our concerns and our worries, and our people kept dying, until the year 2001, when their own people, when the Western world got attacked, there was no concern, there was not much awareness regarding the terrorism as a major security threat in the Western world. But after the 2011, certainly there was a growing rise of awareness. Many think tanks came up, and the terrorism was discussed and defined as a major, existential threat to even human civilization. So we saw many people studying terrorism as a separate discipline. But then there was some lack of, not just some, I would say a major lack of strategic wisdom. Because, even after such a grave attack, Americans, could not understand the fact, or they deliberately did not understand the fact, that remains a question, that Pakistan was the main force behind this Taliban in Afghanistan, and maybe Al Qaeda also. Okay? So they could have gone easily after Pakistan post 2001. They could have dismantled the ISI's terror infrastructure, in fact, disintegrated the country itself with the help of Indians. If they had done that, they would have closed the jihad terror factory of the world then and there only. In that case, India would have been stronger. Chinese couldn't have done anything in 2001 because they were not powerful and enough to challenge the American might. Russians were weak. So Americans could have easily pulled this through. And if they had done that today, we wouldn't have had CPEC. We would be, we would have Americans, be sitting here with some kind of a military base, and an intelligence base, doing operations, or not just operations, but maintaining things jointly with Indians. China couldn't have expanded its strategic footprint in that area. Russians would have become stronger, but Russians had already come to some kind of understanding with Americans, after 4 to 5 decades of the Cold War. And at least we wouldn't have been facing this, kind of jihadist problem. After that, but they prefer to intervene in Iraq, intervene in Libya, and instead of crushing the jihadist forces, all their interventions and foreign policy decisions led to the expansion of jihadist forces. And as Paul Newman rightly said, after 15 years of the war on terror, we had more powerful terrorist organizations like ISIS. And today, after the American withdrawal, it seems that the Taliban, a bunch of ragtag rebels, have emerged more powerful, and they could successfully oust a superior American power with the backing of a rogue regime called Pakistan, whose economy is shattered and battered. So certainly, this war on terror has failed. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. So I would like to build upon that a little bit more, and would like you to elaborate a little more on war or terror. I mean, as you yourself mentioned that what we saw in Afghanistan, the recent withdrawal of American troops. I mean, the chaos it ensued in the country is also now widely seen as the hallmark of American failure in the war on terror, as you have also mentioned. So how do you think this the overall US war against terrorism changed the global perception of American power? And do you think that it helped to create the so-called post-American world, or let's say the end of Pax Americana, as it being widely said now?
Certainly, it has brought the end of American empire, and it has also expedited the process of decline of the American this might. Okay, and I must say that as a major superpower, okay, Americans should have consulted Indians how to deal with Afghanistan, and they should have understood and realized that that this is a battle terrain where your methodology of fighting a conventional war is not applicable at all. And it always suited the Chinese and Russians, to have the Americans do the dirty job of containing the jihadists, so that Chinese could focus more on their economic expansion. If the Americans had understood and realized well that the core of the problem was Pakistan, your non-state actors like Taliban, Al-Qaeda, certainly, they were functioning. They had this very extreme barbaric radical ideology, but they couldn't have functioned and prospered without the safe havens, without the shelters, without the training and the medical assistance which Pakistan was providing. And Christine Fair has very lucidly written, I've explicitly mentioned that, about the Operation Airlift. When Americans were hunting down Al-Qaeda cadres, Pakistan was airlifting Al-Qaeda cadres and putting them in safe havens in Pakistan. So certainly this war on terror has failed. Secondly, I guess Americans failed to understand the ideological part of it, because this is not just about a terror group or a few individuals. There is the very strong factor of the the radical Islamist ideology working behind it, and they could not contain the organizations peddling such ideological thing. The radical extremist ideology even in their homeland. You have many charities like Islamic Circle of North America, ICNA, Muslim American Society, MAS, and Kashmir Canadian Council, Kashmir American Council. These organizations have been masquerading as charity organizations for over last maybe 10 years, 15 years, and getting all the money from the state exchequer, as foundations registered under 503C Act, and they were getting all the money for humanitarian aid, relief work. and they were, kind of indulging in, spreading extremist ideology. You just go and see their websites. It's only lately that some think tanks like Middle East Forum and some experts like Cliff Smith, Sam Westrop, and Abha Shankar, they started working on the activities of Islamist organizations. I mean, we always talk about terror organizations, but one hardly talk about the Islamist organizations. I mean, those they hide in a plain sight. They work as charity organizations, and they are all connected to terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, like Jaish-e-Mohammed, like Hamas and all. And those linkages have come out. You just have a look at the publications of Middle East Forum, an investigative project on terrorism. Even in my book, Radicalization in India and Exploration, I have written in detail about such organizations. So that's where Americans failed. Secondly, even in the war on terror financing, Americans failed because they chose to focus more on the formal financial channels like the banks and freezing assets and all. But as they focused more on the formal financial channels, the terror groups switched back to the traditional and the conventional methods, like Hawala, which had no formal records. Osama bin Laden once famously said that. I know the international system just the way I know my palms. I know the palm of my hand. So this made Paul Newman conclude that after the 15 years of war on terror, I mean, we have more powerful and financially robust terrorist organizations. And secondly, Americans could not do anything against the states who were sponsoring terrorist groups like Pakistan. Pakistan provides the maximum funding to groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and now even groups like Taliban and maybe ISKP also to a large extent. Okay, so we could not. I mean, not just about us. I mean, we have always been saying, but Americans and the international organizations like FATF could do nothing, absolutely nothing, to contain these things. So the war on terror has certainly failed. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Interestingly, you also covered a little from my next question, and so I would like to improvise a little. I mean, you mentioned that how the and when war on terror eventually failed. So these international organizations or international terrorist groups and this global jihad, it obviously expanded to new proportions now. So now the question which I want to ask you is that in this environment where the non-state actors, these terrorists or these groups, they have become a very very big force. It has become more manageable, provided the subsequent enhancement of state capacities, especially in counterterrorism.
Well, I feel that, well, as far as particular terrorist groups are concerned, certainly state capacities have enhanced, they have strengthened because, let's say, I mean, take the example of India only. Indian security forces have become better hardened and expert in fighting counterinsurgency operations, especially in Kashmir. But then, with the passage of time, even these groups have, enhanced and strengthened their skills. The way they use technology now, mostly the encrypted communication applications, the use of weaponry. Now, I mean, you just see in Kashmir, they are using drones to smuggle weapons. Maybe in some future time, we'll see them using drones to infiltrate, the terrorist cadres. Maybe they can resort to chemical weapons. They can resort to biological weapons. So they are also improvising, innovating, and advancing. Secondly, I feel that I mean, this threat is even bigger, larger because of the ideological part. Ideologically, they are spreading and they are making a very convincing case for a large part of the Muslims across the world. Because see, like Taliban and ISIS, they presented a successful model of raising a caliphate-based empire, a Sharia empire, which if projected, in a certain way by the religious clerics, and it is already being done by them, makes it like it's some kind of a religious duty of a Muslim to support it, support this particular initiative. Even in India, you can see that this Taliban's conquest has been supported by some very astounding voices, includes prominent intellectuals like Munawwar Rana, some journalists like Ghazala Wahab, a very educated journalist, who have always been very progressive faces of the Indian journalism. They have hailed Taliban as freedom fighters. You just go and read their social media posts. So like this is And when they are writing all these things, they completely forget the fact that, Taliban, the way Taliban behaves is with minorities, with Shias, with females. So this ideological part is spreading, and we saw that in India's case also. A large number of people, like mostly from Kerala, about 100 people, they went and joined ISIS in Syria, ISIS in Afghanistan. They were all from good families, very educated, rich families. They were all very qualified people, technocrats, engineers. Now, what motivated a group of people from that particular state, which is quite superior in academic and educational standards and economic standards to the other states of India, to go and fight jihad 5,000 miles away from your homeland? What motivates them to die? So this ideological appeal has been increasing and it is spreading. Besides that, this is this appeal for this pan-Islamism is not simply confined to some I would say social media or outside the big places. Due to the penetration of smartphones and social media, this appeal has reached even the remotest villages. Maybe let's say Africa, India. We are all facing the same problem. Like in India, we had a very moderate version of Islam. We are mostly Barelvis and Sufis. And until almost a decade back, we never had this issue of certainly communal riots were always taking place, but the linkage of the transnational Islamist ideology with the local Muslims living in the remote areas, it was more or less absent. But now it is spreading. I mean, no doubt the polarized social and political milieu, the communal issues also, and this whole idea of polarized politics also contributes to that kind of thing. But then the ideology of Islamism, jihad, which has been successfully displayed and implemented by groups like Taliban and ISIS, has presented a successful model, and it has its own charm and appeal. So certainly we are living in times when we will face more threats from these non-state actors, and it's going to be a big challenge. You'll have more organizations coming up. You'll have more expansion of groups like Al-Qaeda in Indian subcontinent. And you can see, like, AQIS already tried to expand through its proxies like Indian Mujahideen and SIMI and all. So we already have a history. Now they'll try to do a lot more because of the favorable and protective safe havens in Afghanistan. They have a station from where they can launch themselves. And you have powerful state actors supporting them. For instance, Turkey, Pakistan, China also. Okay? So they will be expanding their strategic footprint. Indeed, we are living in a more challenging times. Can you hear me, Akshay?
Sir, you are quite.
Hello. There is some. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
On your yes.
A little bit more on the India question. I mean, for its part, India has consistently raised the issue of terrorism on platforms and been one of the most active players in this regard. So, how do you think and from it affects India's security at large, and also how India will charter the future course vis-a-vis its actions against global terrorism?
Good questions. Yeah. So India faces this terrorism and radicalization challenge at two levels: at a diplomatic and international level, and at a domestic level. Certainly, at an international level, with the advent of Taliban, things are more trickier, more problematic for us, because we have all the gang of adversaries, unfavorable, state elements and non-state actors sitting very safely and powerful in Afghanistan. You have Turkey, which has already raised its pitch against India, long before the Article 370, but majorly after the abrogation of Article 370. So Turkey will be present with its Sadat forces, which is like a private paramilitary army of Erdogan, expert in training jihadis. They have trained jihadists in Libya and Syria. They might do the same thing to your Kashmir-based terrorist groups. Secondly, they are likely to help the Kashmir-centric terrorist groups with the drone technology, superior, and Turks have like very advanced, superior drone technology. So you may see, some of these advanced and superior drones ending up with the Kashmir-centric groups, and that they may be used for planning attacks, staging attacks, for infiltration, for smuggling weaponry, etc. Secondly, Americans have left a huge cache of arms, about 600,000 light weapons and assault rifles, So they will be ending up with the Kashmiri-centric terrorist groups. Besides that, many other advanced weapons and night vision devices, they will come to Kashmir and other parts of India. So India faces these odd situations, and then we have China also, raising frictions on the Ladakh border and also supporting, having a good understanding with Taliban. So in such a scenario, India will have to be, first of all, show a very firm posture against Taliban and against Pakistan, and don't let them believe that after the Taliban conquest, India is vulnerable. For a long time after the Pulwama, sorry, let me go to pre-Pulwama first. For a long time, after the Pakistan's nuclear, explosion, those tests, Pakistan blackmailed India, with the nuclear threat that if you do, we will continue to stage or sponsor terror attacks, and if you retaliate, there is always a chance of nuclear retaliation. And our strategic experts, they continue to get fooled or just get in that trap. But after the Pulwama, we shattered Pakistan's nuclear bluff, and after that, for a long time, they were very puzzled that now India is going to retaliate with much stronger force and the nuclear blackmail is gone. So now, but with this Taliban's conquest, they again feel that India is vulnerable and India is not going to raise to retaliate, because India will always worry about China raising some action, on the Ladakh border, and China instigating Pakistanis to boil up the Kashmir LOC border or create street unrest in Kashmir. So India will not, dare to retaliate against any terror attack. But we have to break this myth. We have to break this false belief in which Pakistan is living. So first, we have to, be very firm that any terror attack on our country, and you will have to pay through your nose. You'll have to bear very heavy consequences. Secondly, make it clear to Taliban also that yes, we are going to engage you, but we don't. But if you are found, sheltering, sponsoring any group that attacks India, you will have to face tough consequences. This has to be clear. Thirdly, Americans have betrayed us, whether we agree or not. Americans have betrayed us. They kept us out of the critical negotiations. So we have to be equally tough with Americans. We shouldn't come under their trap and try to or just become their fodder cannon against the Chinese or maybe against Russians. Okay, we have to be very firm with them and make them take tough action against Pakistan. If they want us to do anything favorable to them. And we have to also maintain and strengthen our ties with the Russians, okay, because Russians have been our very long friends and they have displayed strategic wisdom. They also feel the threat from Pakistan, this jihadist ecosystem, and Afghanistan's spreading jihadist ideology, because if this ideology spreads to Central Asia, the terror jihadist ideology, Russians are worried about that. So we have to talk to Russians and just talk about the common concerns and also a strategy to deal with such anti-human forces, the jihadist forces. Thirdly, we can also talk to China that well, ultimately even you will be facing this terrorist problem from Taliban later or sooner. Okay, so this is a time where we should act as responsible powers and talk to each other, find a common ground where we can act and where we can and we should display some strategic wisdom, some kind of I would say pragmatism in resorting our boundary differences. Okay, and thirdly, in our internal part, inside the domestic part is concerned, I feel that first of all we have to have a very strong counter narrative against the Taliban's ideology. In not just in Kashmir but in the rest of the India also, and anyone who is found supporting this ideology has to be dealt with in a very tough manner, and we have to project and support the project of Indian Islam, okay, and all kinds of extra schools projecting extremist ideology, be it Deobandi, be it Wahhabism, whatever, but who are even being apologetic. They may be peaceful, they may not be indulging, but even ideologically, if they're being apologetic towards such ideological trends, those extremist trends, deal with them very firmly. India is a secular country, India is a multicultural country, and those who accept our constitution, those who accept our multicultural traditions, our liberal traditions, they are welcome in this country. Otherwise, rest of the people can go to hell. We have to be very firm, because we cannot afford to be a soft state anymore. Oh, besides that, I have given a concept of national radicalization index in my book, and I guess it's right now. I mean, it's a theoretical tool which I have discussed, but if worked on properly, it can be turned into a good statistical tool to measure the radicalization levels in different various parts of India using several indicators which I have discussed in my book, and that tool can be developed further. It can be utilized to understand the radicalization trends, and if it is used successfully and in a objective manner, in a very serious manner, then it can help us to contain or like nip in the bud some of the early threats, like which will become problems later. Yeah. And lastly, we have to upgrade and enhance the skills and the capability of our intelligence apparatus. I must say the people, even those who are joining senior civil services and police services, they display an inadequate understanding of strategic matters, the security matters. So you need to have specialized courses and especially discourses on counterterrorism. Lectures on counterterrorism. The state level intelligence wings need to be strengthened and enhanced a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that comprehensive answer. And also the recommendation which you just gave, I think it have a lot of policy relevance and a lot of strategic relevance, which the strategic community in India should look at. So I think this brings us to the conclusion of our conversation today. And we covered a lot of crucial issues. I mean, terrorism is something which have a profound effect on each and every one of us, and you existential threat. And so on that note, I'd like to thank you, sir, for illuminating us on the subject, and we look forward to host you again.
Thank you very much. Namaskar. Thank you.